Britain's Prime Minister has told members of Parliament that they will have a chance to delay Brexit if they defeat her deal again. Theresa May's change of heart came after several senior ministers threatened to resign unless she allowed MPs to extend the March deadline to avoid the UK crashing out of the EU without a withdrawal agreement. Parliament is due to hold its next vote on Mrs May's deal on the 12th of March. The Prime Minister's announcement follows word from the opposition Labour Party on Monday that it would support calls for a second referendum if it doesn't get the deal it wants.
If the House, having rejected leaving with the deal negotiated with the EU, then rejects leaving on the 29th of March without a withdrawal agreement and future framework, the Government will, on the 14th of March, bring forward a motion on whether Parliament wants to seek a short, limited extension to Article 50. And if the House votes for an extension, seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU and bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
Let's get more on this from Birgit Maas, who's outside the Houses of Parliament in London. Welcome, Birgit. What else did Theresa May tell MPs today?
Well, she said that she really does want to make Brexit happen. She said anything else would be a betrayal of democracy. And she made it clear that for her, only a short extension is something that she would consider, because she says at the end of these 3 months, so at the end of June, we would still somehow face a cliff edge scenario, which is something that many in Parliament really want to avoid. They want to avoid crashing out of the European Union without a deal. Theresa May has said, well, it's best to vote for me, vote for my deal now, because even if you get an extension, you would still, in the end, face the situation that you can still crash out without a deal if there is no, in this period of time, if there is no agreement. So 3 months and no more than that with the Prime Minister.
Well, let's pick up on that point, Birgit. If the British Parliament does vote to extend this deadline, what do they hope to achieve in 3 months that they haven't in 2 years?
That's a very good question, Phil. I think Theresa May is stressing that she's still negotiating with Brussels, and they're sending the Attorney General over, hoping that he can bring some more clarification, something more than warm words. I've just spoken to one of Theresa May's own party's Brexiteers, and he said, well, we in the EU are very, very close together. Nobody wants to have the so-called backstop come into effect, which is the situation of Northern Ireland. It's more a matter of giving us some assurance that we have some possibility to leave, and we need to know that we are able to leave the European Union. That's what they want to hear. So she's saying we're still negotiating. Trust me, I will come back from Brussels with something, and then she's going to put it to a vote in about 2 weeks' time.
Let's bring in Max Hoffman in our studio in Brussels. Welcome, Max. How is the EU likely to respond to an extension request from the UK?
There has been growing sympathy, Phil, here in Brussels to extend the Article 50 period, so effectively to delay Brexit. But the EU has always insisted that there needs to be a reason for that. And that's where your question from earlier comes in. What should they achieve in 3 months that they hadn't achieved in 2 years? Indeed, a very good question. If there is no purpose to the extension, let's say a second referendum or new elections, then the EU will have to be creative in explaining why they are granting this extension. Normally, the thinking here was that it would be a technical extension, meaning that they would be willing to extend this Article 50 period if the end was in sight, if they knew where they were heading, if there was a solution in sight and they just needed a little more time to implement that. But that's not the case at the moment. So although there is sympathy for an extension, the reason for which Theresa May would seek that extension is not clearer than before.
You see, an extension makes an already complicated situation ridiculous. If this is extended to June, say, there are European parliamentary elections in May. How would that affect that? And would Britain even take part?
It's a very legal and technical question, but the thinking here is that if they extend up until the first session of the new parliament, so before the new parliament constitutes itself, then they would be fine. If they go beyond that, and let's say in the first session, which takes place in July of the new European Parliament, that parliament makes a decision, a legally binding decision, then it gets complicated, because then anyone in Britain or anywhere in the European Union could probably go to court and say, hang on a second, the UK at that point was, technically speaking, part of the European Union. They did not get their say in this decision by the European Parliament. So any decision that the Parliament takes then without the Brits could be very difficult to stand up in court. And that's why everybody talks about an extension up until the end of June.
All right. Final question to you, Birgit Maas. On this question of a second referendum, Britain's main opposition announced yesterday that they would now support a second referendum under certain specific circumstances. This is a mess already. How disruptive would a second referendum be to British life and British politics?
Well, that, of course, depends who you ask. Those who have fought for a second referendum, for them, this is really a very happy moment and a very happy circumstance that Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, has changed its stance, because they have always said that if Parliament can't clear up what they call this mess, then it has to be going back to the people, and it might in the end be the only solution for the Brexit crisis, because emotions, not just here in front of Parliament, you can hear all these people shouting behind me, but also in Parliament are really high, and people really have their entrenched views on whether Brexit is something that needs to happen and anything else is undemocratic, or whether they think it's really the downfall of the UK to leave the European Union. So the question is, how can they bring Parliament back together? They might not, and in that case they might have to bring it back to the British people. But Theresa May has also once again said that she is absolutely against a second referendum, so it remains to be seen whether this will actually happen or not.
Birgit Maas in London, Max Hoffman in Brussels. Thank you both.